"Hello," said the creature, stepping out of the invisible door. The man, sitting at a wooden desk littered with mugs and stained by coffee, looked up from his notebook. "You weren't meant to solve the equation," said the creature, quite impressed. "But now that you have solved it, you've gained access to the door." The door?" said Edward. "Yes, that's right, the door. It's just behind me, although you can't see it. However, it's simple enough to step through." "What are you?" asked Edward, trying to grasp the creature's shape. One second it was an old man, the next a child, but only ever the shadow of either. Like a living Rorschach test, like a puddle of ink, the creature always undulating and shifting. "I'm the creature from behind the door," said the creature. "You found out how to access the door, so here I am. Think of me as a guide here to move you to another place." The ink changed again. He was sure he recognized that beard that dribbled down from the ink chin. His high school science teacher, Mr. Talley. But he was dead, surely. He'd been old even back then. Then it shifted once more, to a young man, continually evolving. Edward stood and walked around the giant ink blot, but it seemed to rotate without moving as Edward circled it, like a 2D object. "It's just you, isn't it?" said the creature. "Just me?" "Your family died in the tsunami, correct?" Edward nodded, still circling. The ink looked like his father now, and his brother. As far as Edward could tell, though, there was no door. It must truly be invisible. "And that's why you were working on the equation, correct?" "Correct again," said Edward. What a fascinating creature, and quite polite, too. "Can you tell me what you hope to achieve with time travel?" Edward shrugged. "I wanted to go back to the day of the tsunami." Said the creature. "Yes, that makes sense. You wanted to save your family." "Right," said Edward. "But that isn't true, is it?" "What do you mean it isn't true?" "Well," said the creature, now looking a bit like his wife. Edward didn't like the ink taking such a form. "Well," it continued, "when you found out they were all dead, you did feel sad. But there was another set of emotions entwined with the sadness, correct?" How did the creature know any of this? "I don't know what you're talking about." "I need you to be honest with me," said the creature. "If you want to use the door, you need to be honest." Edward slumped back down in his chair and forced himself to remember the day. The entire coast had been washed away. The buildings snapped like twigs under a giant's foot. His family weren't even meant to be at the beach, but his wife had taken them out while Edward had been working, as a treat. "I miss them very much," said Edward. Yes, I can see that. But tell me how you felt upon learning they died." Now the creature looked like his old teacher again. I don't know. I got home and read the note that she'd taken them to the beach and I knew in that moment that they were dead. I was hit by a terrible sickness." He thought of that moment, of leaning over his toilet certain he was about to vomit, although he never did. Then he remembered something else. Something he'd not thought of since that day. His heart thrummed in his ears now, in his throat. He didn't want to remember it. "And?" He'd married at 19. It wasn't until their first child that he'd realized it had been a mistake. That yes, he loved her, but not in the way he should, the way you're meant to spend your life with another person. But by then they'd had a child, and the door he could have walked through to escape his life was shut and locked. Edward's own parents had divorced when he'd been 7. It had destroyed him. He couldn't do that to his own child. And I felt relieved," he said, weakly. He began sobbing into his hands, his back shaking as he cried, his entire body hot with guilt. Suddenly, that day, the door that had been locked for so long had swung open. The future that had been written was blank. "Only briefly," he said, smearing tears away from his cheeks, "and then it was gone. It was just a thought that bubbled up. God, I'm sorry. I loved them, and I didn't want them gone." The equations, the nights he hadn't been able to sleep and he'd chosen to work instead, were not for want of bringing his family back, he realized. He could never bring them back. Instead, it was out of guilt. He couldn't sleep knowing he'd thought what he had, that he'd been relieved. He couldn't stand to spend a moment in simple quiet in case his mind had the same treacherous thought again. So instead of sleeping, he sat in his desk all night, every night, and worked on an impossible equation pretending it was a valiant endeavor. Now he sat up very straight in his chair. The room was silent. The creature was gone. All that was there, some way beyond where the creature had stood, splashed on the far wall, was an old ink stain. If he stared at it long enough, it could look like anything. God, he was tired.